Thank you for giving us some time, Dmitry. Appreciate it a lot and respect your opinion a lot. You know, there's so many moving parts going on now around Ukraine, escalations, another serious environmental, ecological disaster, and a lot of finger pointing from Washington. I don't think anybody buys it anymore. That really, they're wasting all the money giving it to Ukraine because Ukraine doesn't have to fight Russia. Russia will blow up itself. That seems to be the logic in Washington. What's it look like from where you are?
Well, you know, in our conversation, I will try to get into the shoes of the people who criticize Russia. Let's make it somewhat nuanced, you know, approach to it. So, I mean, why does the West believe that Russia is to blame for what happened, for this flood, which happened because the dam actually got destroyed? You know, the logic of Saint-Pierre and the other people speaking on behalf of the West is very simple. They say that Russia started the war, Russian troops are not where they are supposed to be, so this is all Russia's fault. Well, this is first, you know, she's taking things out of context. Let's remember that, in fact, the war started in 2014 when the Ukrainian government decided to quell the rebellion in the east, and the rebellion was quite justified because the president whom the people in the east of Ukraine elected legally, and that victory was recognized by the United States, Viktor Yanukovych, he was chased out of the country. He was forced to leave his office, and he had to leave the country because of the violent coup in Kiev. You know, now we can call it a violent coup because 38 policemen were killed, hundreds were maimed, and what happened was actually very much like what happened near the Capitol Hill, at the Capitol Hill in January 2021. You know, basically the mob just entered the parliament's building, and after that the Ukrainian parliament suddenly started passing decisions quite different from what they did before the mob entered the building. The only difference is that the United States supported the people who did it in Ukraine, and in the United States, this guy from the Oath Keepers, an idiot as he is, you know, he got how many? 18 years, I guess, for what he did, right? So basically, I hope our listeners who just read newspapers, watch television, even Western television, I don't think they can buy what you know, Saint-Pierre said about this environmental disaster.
You know,
to me, it is clear that it was not Russia who did it because, okay, let's use the logic a cui bono, you know, who profits from it? First, you know, the left bank occupied by Russia is the lower bank of that river, Dnieper. Dnieper is the huge river in Eastern Europe, second only to Volga, you know. And the flood actually affected the areas which are under Russian control. It destroyed some of the fortifications that our troops have built there. The western bank of the river is much higher, and the Ukrainian defenses suffered a lot less from the flood. The other argument is that you know, this water actually was supposed to go to Crimea. It was supposed to feed the water reservoirs of Crimea. So, of course, for Russia, it made absolutely no sense to make this disaster.
Right.
You wanted to ask something?
Yeah, I just on the comparison between the Maidan and January 6th, there's an important point of distinction. Dozens of police officers were killed in Kiev. The only person to be killed on January 6th was a protester who was shot in the face by police. So, I mean, that's a major distinction also.
Well, we heard that some policemen also suffered or maybe even died. I don't remember. You know, there were lots of rumors about it. But also, let me remind you that, you know, the people who came to the Capitol Hill, they contested the results of the election. So they did something that the United States considered utterly legitimate when it happened. For example, in 2004, 2005, when Mr. Yushchenko contested the results of the election that he lost.
Yeah.
And you know, he absolutely insisted that his people should be included in the Electoral Commission and the rerun should be held, you know, all that stuff. Yeah. In Ukraine, there was absolutely no legal reason for the people on Maidan to use all that violence against the police, you know, throwing Molotov cocktails, setting public buildings on fire. They have been doing it for 5 months.
That's right.
And the United States and the EU approved of it. I mean, they never stopped short of, you know, giving complete approval to the actions of these people, you know.
From the stage. They were showing up from the stage and egging them on. John McCain.
There was, exactly, there was John McCain, and there was the German Foreign Minister, Westerwelle, and there were people like the chairman of the Lithuanian parliament, and Bernard-Henri Lévy, you know, that warmongering pacifist was there, philosopher as he calls himself. Okay, let's come back to you know, the international reaction to what's going on. It is clear that Ukraine is unable to start a real offensive against the Russian positions. Let me remind you of the reaction of the West to this war from the very beginning. The reactions of the West were hysterical, and they were all wrong. You know, all predictions were wrong. Let me remind you how it all started. On February 24th, when the Russian special operation started, the initial expectation of the West was that the Ukrainian army would be defeated. Some kind of guerrilla war would emerge in the rears of the Russian army, with people, you know, in the small villages and towns, you know, rebelling against the Russian rule. The Westerners do not understand that there is absolutely almost no difference between Russians and Ukrainians. It's like the difference between Texans and New Mexicans. It's not even the difference between Californians and Texans. You know, the difference between Californians and Texans is much bigger than the difference between Russians and Ukrainians. Right. But okay, and they expected that Russia would crumble under the sanctions in a month. So the exact opposite happened. The Ukrainian army, you know, resisted and was very successful. Let's admit it. There was no popular rebellion in the territories which were controlled by Russia, because most of the people there are ethnic Russians. Right. And they were quite happy if the Ukrainian side had not started bombarding them. Russian economy did not crumble under the sanctions because, surprise, surprise, G7 is no longer the only 7 developed countries in this world. There is also China, there is also Brazil. You know, there are many countries which are richer and which can supply you with more technologies and goods than some of the G7 member countries. Then there was a change of mood in the West. You know, in spring it was decided that, in spring 2022, it was decided that the West wanted Ukraine to win. It was an absolutely unrealistic desire, you know, expressed by Boris Johnson. So they forced Ukraine to stop peace negotiations in Istanbul. They started pumping up, you know, the Ukrainian army with more and more weapons. In September, there was a short, successful counteroffensive. The reason for it was very simple. Putin did not want to mobilize anyone in Russia. He wanted initially to win this war with a small professional expeditionary force. That didn't happen. And in September, Ukrainians were successful precisely because they had a huge superiority in numbers against that small expeditionary force initially sent by Putin. Putin did not expect it to be a bloody war. In autumn last year, Russia mobilized 300,000 new soldiers. Not all of them are in Ukraine, but those who were sent were enough to fill the gaps on this front line, which is longer than 1,000 kilometers now. And right now there's a stalemate, because if Russians try to attack, Ukrainians are going to use the Western-made missiles and destroy them the moment they get out of their trenches. If Ukrainians attack, the Russian aviation will destroy them before they even reach the Russian positions, especially now when there is that swamp between us. So in a way, this is a stalemate, and the only sound voices that I hear from the West, they come in a very blurred fashion because these people are scared to death. They're scared of being considered Russian agents. But just today, I read an article which is headlined "Unwinnable War" by Samuel Cherep in Foreign Affairs. And Samuel Cherep, whom I know from his Moscow days, he was not very smart Western analyst. You know, he covered the war in Georgia. He met all the Russian experts, and still he said that Russia was not a free country. You know, he interviewed everyone he wanted here, just like Fiona Hill, who had a chance to interview Putin 5 or 6 times during the Valdai discussion clubs. But still, she thinks that everything was wrong. Russia was not free enough. So anyway, he writes in a cynical way that, you know, Russia is bad and it's nice that Russians are losing people, but this war may be so long that it will get dangerous for us too. So we need some kind of a truce. We need some kind of settlement. You know, maybe we will we'll give Ukraine the same guarantees Israel was given in 1975. Before the agreement between Sadat and Begin. That at least sounds a little bit more realistic than Boris Johnson's appeals, you know, and Emmanuel Macron's appeals. You know, first Ukraine wins and then they negotiate. So that is a little bit more realistic. Also in France, sometimes you read articles by Renaud Girard and a few other people who were considered very pro-Russian just 2 years ago, and who now just modestly say, okay, maybe we should not think about Ukrainian victory, we should think about saving lives and stopping this war, which becomes very dangerous. Because let me remind you, you know, this flood, it may end up with the Zaporozhye nuclear plant not getting enough water to cool its reactors. And then Zaporozhye nuclear plant is much bigger than Chernobyl. And you remember what happened in 1986 in Chernobyl. Then all of our troubles now would seem like, you know, jokes compared to what we could face then. You know, I am plagued by the thoughts, you know, when did it go wrong? What did we do wrong? And could we avoid it? I must tell you that, you know, I'm trying to be realistic. Putin was the most pro-Western Russian president in the history of this country. You know, even Gorbachev initially was more suspicious of the West than Putin. But the attitude, you know, the new ideology that won in the West, which obviously wants to remake the world, it is a revolutionary radical ideology. It just did not accept any kind of compromise. And unfortunately, you know, I agree with Samuel Cherep that this war may last as long as the war between Iran and Iraq. Why did the war between Iran and Iraq last so long, 8 years? Because you had a totalitarian leader on the Iraqi side, Saddam Hussein, and a totalitarian ideology on the other side in Iran. And unfortunately, you know, right now in the West, we have a totalitarian ideology, which forced Putin to become a lot more authoritarian than he intended in the beginning. We still have a lot more freedom than, say, Poles or Czechs. You know, I speak both Polish and Czech, and I can tell you that life there is terrible. You know, people are forced to forget, you know, decades of their past. You know, all the traces of the so-called communist period, which was not communist, they are all destroyed. And you know, when I think about comparisons, when I think about you know, what was bad and what was good before, you know, okay, even Castro, you know, Castro, I don't want to idealize him. He has my sympathies because He was a symbol of Latin American pride, resisting the way of life that they didn't want to accept. But at least, Castro, people under him did not live a nice life. I admit that. But, with Russia, the United States and the EU had such an opportunity. We now live, and we have been living in the last 20 years, better than at any other period in our history. Putin was not and is not a communist. And he is not a dictator. He is not an ultra-right or a Russian nationalist. We had all the opportunities, and they missed them all. They created a scarecrow in their own minds. And the people who did it, the journalists and analysts who did it, they committed a huge crime. To my mind, the people who created this demonic image of Russia, like they're creating now the demonic image of China, these people are real criminals. Their lies are incredible. History will judge the people like Fiona Hill and Angela Stant. I'm sure it will judge them more severely than Eric Schmidt or Joseph Goebbels, because Goebbels and Schmidt, okay, they lived inside a totalitarian society from the beginning, right? And they were opportunists. These people, the people like Fiona Hill and Angela Stant, created a scarecrow out of nothing, and they lied, not even because they lied about something they saw. Hitler and Goebbels demonized the Jews and the Jewish life that they had no idea about. Fiona Hill demonized something she knew very well, the Russian life. So it's inexcusable, it's terrible, and it's getting more and more dangerous.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Yeah, it is pretty scary too that people can be that blind, and there's so many things that are swirling around this terrible scarecrow that they've created. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.